Greetings, YouTube. So I found myself taking a look at the new Spelljammer for 5th edition. Um, and I was kind of interested in seeing how they interpreted some of the species and some of the rules and the setting and such. Because while I have a real fondness for a lot of the stuff from Spelljammer, there were things about it that never really clicked for me. The whole crystal sphere thing, the phlogiston between the spheres, things like that. It all felt a little clunky, even for a high fantasy setting. I love the plot, the diagrams and the floor plans, the literal deck plans of all the different kinds of spelljammers. They were super cool, and I like the fact that people have come up with their own since the game has, since the creation of those rules for second edition. Um, and I thought that was awesome. And the GIF are absurd, and that they always made me shake my head, but they also made me smile. Um, so I wanted to see those kind of things kind of brought to the present day in fifth edition and see how they did. And it was interesting to see the Star Frontiers species in there. I thought that was kind of cool. That made me smile. Though they decided to redo the Duralicites as an ooze species, not a total stretch, but an ooze species that presents itself by assuming the shape of a humanoid all the time for the most part. And I always liked one of the things I liked about the Duralicites is they were just blobs with tentacles. And they could come up with limbs if they needed them, but they didn't need them. They were just a blob moving around. Somewhat akin to the guy from the Orville. Um, and I love the Duralicites. That were just really cool. And the Yazarans were there. Though I've always preferred the Yazarans, which are essentially a species of flying monkey like flying squirrels, to have their flaps be one solid sheet, just like a flying squirrel does, as opposed to the ones in the setting 5th edition Spelljammer rather. They had them little things right here, then big open spaces. But that's not going to work. It just isn't. It's not going to be structurally strong enough to function. You need to have all that surface area to be able to maintain that much force when you're flying. I mean, that's a lot of force, folks. That's a lot of energy being a force being spread over surface area, and that bond between your body and that membrane really needs to be very solid. So I thought their wings were their flaps were a little weak, and I didn't like that. Um, but one of the things that I really did like was the way they've reinterpreted traveling on Spelljammer ships through the universe between the star systems. So within the star system, it is, if that particular star system is like ours, the empty void of space. So if you go from a planet surface to their orbiting moon like ours, there's no air out there. Okay, there's an air bubble around your ship that will be depleted by the people inside it as they breathe, which really does give you a bonus and and a desire to have a crew that doesn't breathe. So I think there'd be a lot of uh, popularity with hiring on folks that don't breathe. So automatons or the undead and things like that, because they would have a distinct advantage when it came to durability and longevity while traveling within a star system. But once you get outside the star system, say like beyond what we would call the Kuiper Belt, you begin to move into the astral plane. You begin to make a phase slowly. Things get misty and misty and misty, and all of a sudden, whoosh, you're out into intergalactic space, and now you're into the astral plane where you don't eat, drink, or breathe. So then you don't have to worry about breathing and supplies and things. So now it kind of explains how you can make it between star systems in a universe that is not kind of getting around the whole faster than light thing, because the ships move at incredibly unbelievably fast speeds due to magic, but you don't have to worry about supplies because now it doesn't matter. It really doesn't isn't a big deal, except you may have business back in another star system, so you don't want to be taking forever. But if it takes you 6 months to get from point A to point B, you're not concerned like you would be traveling in our world on a ship for 6 months, like a sub, for example. You have to make sure you're properly supplied, otherwise you're not going to make it that long. But if it's in the astral plane, you don't have to be concerned with it. And you get to throw in astral creatures, which are cool. There's lots of species that have been thrown into high fantasy settings for D&D over the decades that are inherently native to uh, the astral planes, or at least use the astral planes as a base or a form of transportation. And that's awesome. And it's a way of having that happen without the need of truly high level spell casting. As long as you can get yourself onto the crew of a ship that's going outside a system, you're going to find your way into the astral plane. And I really like the idea of being able to achieve planar travel without high level magic. You're not having to open up, wicked powerful gates to achieve that end, or hope some, NPCs got plane shift, or wait till your group has plane shift and things like that. No, no, no. You get yourself on board a Spelljammer ship through, luck or rook by crook, whatever, and then you can just sail out of your system and you're on your astral plane. And I read that. I'm like, this is really cool. This makes me smile. Um, and I didn't realize that that's how they were handling it until I looked at the books. I'm like, okay, this is cool. This is a really nice take, and I think it really fits my kind of mental image of how to handle high fantasy space travel. You're now doing it in a way that makes perfect sense to me. It makes it practical because you don't have to worry about air and food and water and all that crap. Um, and you're exposing them to strange and bizarre encounters with other species and with, you know, monsters and such that are going to be out there in the astral plane. Um, and it's just rife with the concepts of adventure. So I was very pleased to see that. I'm not saying I'm going to, hop on board 5th edition because no, I think 5th edition, like 2nd edition Pathfinder, just makes me think of a walled garden. Every time I read the rules, I just feel like I'm smacking into walls again and again and again. No, I don't like them. But I do find it interesting to see somebody interpret something in a brand new way, in a way I had never considered doing. And I don't think a way I've ever seen anyone else do high fantasy space travel that way. I don't think I've ever seen anybody use the astral plane in that way. I could be wrong. There are a lot of high fantasy RPGs out there. I've read bunches of it in my day, but I haven't read them all. So if anybody out there knows that there is a cool mechanic that uses some kind of magical travel to get from one star system to another, I'd be interested in hearing about it. Like for example, Space 1889, the travel is long, but it's within our system. You're going to Mars, you're going to Venus, um, so those places are not close, but they're more doable. And as long as your ship is fast, it's much more like traveling in our world from one continent to another across the oceans. Um, but if you're going to be going between the stars, you really need to come up with a mechanic to shrink those distances one way or the other. And one of the ways you can do that is make the people in the ships be ageless. So now it doesn't matter a whole heck of a lot, particularly if you're doing this full time. You're never planning on going back to a planet. It doesn't matter where you stop off when it comes to star systems. You have no home base. Your ship is your home base. So if you're out there effectively for 100 years between 2 points, you don't care. It is of no matter to you, which would have a campaign that would be very long term, but still could be very cool. So yeah, let's talk about using the astral plane as a means of transporting yourself from one place to another in a high fantasy setting. And if you've seen it and done something like that anywhere else, where it was an interesting take on high fantasy space travel, I would be interested in hearing about it, because I'm always up for reading a new system or a new setting that's got some cool ideas. Um, so yeah, let's see what you have to say about the 5th edition take on Spelljammer.